Hi, my name is Lee Carter, and I am excited to have the opportunity to study the parables of Jesus with you. You know, even in an age where the world knows very little about the scriptures and the kingdom, the parables of Jesus are some of the most well-known stories in the world. And that is because there is truth and wisdom in them that is accessible for all people. It doesn't matter where we're from culturally. Doesn't make a difference, and it doesn't matter what time period we live in. We can relate to the stories that Jesus told his audience just as they could. And so as we approach the parables, I think a good question is why Jesus chose to teach in parables. And I think one reason is that it would have been because the Jews were used to this kind of teaching. The word parable literally means to cast things alongside each other. A parable is an illustration that's cast alongside a truth that it explains. And they're often noted to hold wisdom and clarity, that we can see things clearly on a specific subject. And if we use this definition, then the Bible is full of parables. Think of Nathan telling David about the man who stole another man's sheep when David had killed Uriah. Nathan uses a parable to show David what he's done. The Jews understood this method of teaching, of illustrating a point. The prophets had used it. The rabbis used it. And so Jesus is going to use them as well. And his crowd understands the structure of the lesson. Jesus probably had a variety of reasons for teaching in parables, but another possible reason was that his audience, being Jewish, would have been a very practical crowd. Culturally, Hebrews were seen as a very practical people. The Greeks and the Romans loved to discuss ideas, and they loved argument and debate. And if no conclusion was reached on a specific topic, it didn't bother them at all. In fact, the Greeks especially just wanted to discuss for the sake of the debate and the argument. The Jewish mind, however, didn't work like that culturally. They were interested in reaching conclusions, not arguing for the sake of arguing. And so to the Jewish mind, at the end of a discussion, the question was, in view of all these things that we've discussed, what do I have to do? And so thus, a parable is going to appeal to the Jewish audience that is Jesus' initial focus in his teaching. And of course, the Jews are not alone in their attraction to this form of teaching. Most of us have a tendency to think in pictures. Most of us have a hard time with ideas that are abstract. We like things to be concrete. If Jesus had addressed the crowd with these abstract spiritual ideas that he's going to address through these parables, he very likely would have lost his audience. Frankly, he would lose me. I don't have the ability to understand them outside of these concrete terms. And so he gives us the parables to make these great ideas that he wishes to address understandable for us. He takes the things of heaven and puts them into earthly terms that we can comprehend. You know, Paul in Romans 1:20 says that God designed the visible world to lead us to the invisible things of God. And really the parables work the same way. Jesus teaches us to see the things of God in the world around us, in a mustard seed, in a plant, in the birds of the air, and in each other. We just have to want to see them. The parables are also intended to awaken us to a sudden understanding of truth. They're often used to force us to pass judgment on things which we're well acquainted with, but then we're supposed to make that application, take that judgment that was so clear and easy, and apply it to a situation that maybe we had been too blind to see before. And of course, again, it's what Nathan does to David. The story that Nathan tells to David about the man who stole another man's sheep is easy for David to see with clarity. And he quickly passes judgment on the man who was the thief. He says he should die. And it's only when Nathan says, okay, now you take that judgment and you're going to apply it to yourself. Nathan tells him, you are the man. And it's only then that David can see his own sorry situation. And he says, I have sinned against the Lord. That's what Jesus does with his parables. He tells a story with meaning that anyone can see. And the hearers can't help but judge the situation Jesus is setting up, often even as the story is being told. And then Jesus demands that judgment is taken by the hearer and applied to another situation that hadn't been clear before. Whether the blindness or the lack of clarity was due to a deliberate denial, or whether it was just a lack of searching and understanding, suddenly, with a parable, there should be flashes of truth and spiritual wisdom, which should bring the hearer a change of heart. And of course, Jesus already knows the hearts of those who are listening to him. He knows what the audience needs. He knows what every member of the audience needs. It really is incredible. You know, the other thing that we need to consider is that the parables were told on the spur of the moment. They become even more inspiring, and we can see the brilliance of the mind of Jesus. These parables are not crafted in an office or study somewhere in the calm and quiet. They're spoken instantaneously, usually during the debates with people who would test him. And so while we have time to read and analyze, Jesus is speaking in the moment. And more often than not, again, he's using these parables as weapons in a controversy with the Jewish leaders. He's the master craftsman. And the parables give us incredible insight into the mind of our Savior, his genius and his brilliance. Along with that thought, I wanted to address the fact that parables cannot be read as allegory, where an allegory is where every element of a story or an illustration represents something else. The parable of the Good Samaritan is one of the parables that has been overly worked with interpretation, wherein you can see the chart here. Jerusalem is heaven, and the man traveling is Adam, and Jericho represents mortality, and the thieves are the devil, and the inn is the church, the innkeeper is Paul, the oil is good hope, and on and on and on it goes. Again, these stories were told in the spur of the moment, and the hearers usually only heard them once, like a sermon we would hear on a Sunday. They were spoken. They were not read over and over, which is what you would have to do to make that many detailed connections. The parables weren't meant to be broken down into those kinds of things. That's only after years and days and months and consistent detailed study that somebody has come up with a chart like this. It doesn't make sense that that's what Jesus was doing. His hearers wouldn't be able to do that in the spur of the moment. That wasn't the point. The other thing that they are not is they are not secret messages. They weren't some sort of code to stump the Romans. That's not what they were. They're not written in some secret message that we have to struggle through to understand. They were meant to elicit an immediate response. And they do. The whole purpose of the parable was to cause a sudden realization, an epiphany, we call it. So they can't be stories that can only be understood after considerable study or decoding. That wasn't the way they were transferred to the audience. They only confuse the hearers who don't want to hear them. Which is why Christ ends most of his parables with, "He who has ears, let him hear." As we look into the parables, we need to look at the context surrounding each parable. In many cases, we know when and where and to whom Jesus was speaking, and that helps us understand his message. None of the parables contain the whole gospel message. They each illustrate a spiritual truth to the audience. However, when we put them all together, not only can we see the mind of Jesus and his genius, but we can see more clearly the kingdom of heaven and the qualities of its citizens. So, I hope you'll join us as we begin looking into the parables of Jesus. The next lesson will address the parable of the sower. I'll try to get one out every week. But that's the first parable that's recorded by Jesus, and that just makes it a good place to start. Thanks for joining me, and I hope this will be as good for you and beneficial for you as it has been for me. Have a great day.